I was in the theatre dressing room and my agent sent the script over. Silence of the Lambs, and I thought it was a children's story. And he said, "You're playing the part of Lecter." So I read out there. I thought, this is interesting.
In 1991, Anthony Hopkins filmed a scene that exposed the truth about cinema's greatest villain. For 2 minutes, he made the entire crew stop breathing. The director shouted it was the best thing he'd ever filmed. Critics who saw it said Hopkins deserved another Oscar just for that scene. But Jonathan Demme deleted it. Why? Because it revealed something about Hannibal Lecter that would change everything we thought we knew about him. Thomas Harris didn't invent Hannibal Lecter out of thin air. The idea started in the 1960s, when Harris was working as a journalist for Argosy magazine. He had gone to a prison in Mexico to interview a man named Dykes Askew Simmons, an American who had murdered 3 siblings. But it wasn't Simmons who left a mark. It was the doctor treating him. Harris met a man called Dr. Salazar, a polite, educated prison physician who spoke with charm and grace. Only later did Harris find out that this wasn't just a doctor, it was a convicted killer. The doctor's real name was Alfredo Bali Trevino. He was a wealthy surgeon who had murdered his lover, Jesus Castillo Rangel, in 1959. He didn't just kill him, he dismembered the body with clinical precision and packed the remains into a small box, then buried it in his aunt's garden. He served 20 years in prison, got out, returned to medicine, and lived until 2009. But his cold manner, polished manners, and surgical skills stuck in Harris's mind. Years later, they would become the core of Hannibal Lecter. When Harris first introduced Lecter in Red Dragon in 1981, he was just a secondary character. But by The Silence of the Lambs in 1988, Lecter had become unforgettable. A killer who spoke with elegance, quoted philosophy, and ate his victims with fine wine. He wasn't a brute, he was a refined nightmare, and he was about to become a movie legend. That nearly didn't happen. Gene Hackman, fresh off his Oscar win for The French Connection, bought the rights to The Silence of the Lambs. He planned to direct it, produce it, and play FBI agent Jack Crawford. John Hurt was supposed to be Lecter, and Michelle Pfeiffer would be Clarice. Hackman was ready to take full control. But in 1989, he suddenly walked away. The reason? His daughter read the script and begged him not to do it. Hackman also admitted the story's violence made him uncomfortable. With him out, Orion Pictures scrambled to save the project. They turned to Jonathan Demme, a director known for quirky, heartfelt films. At first, Demme didn't want to do it, but after reading the book, he couldn't let it go. He saw something deeper, a story about power, fear, and a woman fighting to be heard. He signed on and started casting, but Orion Pictures had a bigger problem. By 1990, the studio was nearly bankrupt. They were $690 million in debt and losing big. At the Oscars that year, host Billy Crystal joked that Orion was in a coma. They were so desperate, they sold the Addams Family to Paramount just to get back $14.6 million in cash. Paramount turned it into a $113 million hit. Orion's last hope was The Silence of the Lambs. They gave it a tight $19 million budget and hoped for a miracle. Then came the man who would become Lecter. Anthony Hopkins was doing theater in London when his agent called him about a script. The title confused him. The Silence of the Lambs sounded like a kid's movie. But he read just the first few pages and stopped. He called his agent back and said, "Is this an offer? I want it. This is the best role I've ever read." He hadn't even reached page 10. He didn't want to keep reading if someone else had already taken the part. But it could have gone very differently. The role of Lecter was first offered to Sean Connery. Demme thought Connery had the brains and intensity for the role. But Connery said the script was disgusting, and refused. Al Pacino, Robert De Niro, Dustin Hoffman, and even Morgan Freeman were considered. All passed. They couldn't see it. They were used to playing tough guys, but Lecter wasn't tough. He was terrifying in a completely different way. He didn't punch. He whispered. Meanwhile, Clarice Starling almost wasn't Jodie Foster. Jonathan Demme wanted Michelle Pfeiffer first. She was interested, but eventually said no. The script disturbed her. She later said, "Evil won in the end, and I didn't want to put that into the world." Next up was Meg Ryan. She also passed. But Foster didn't give up. She pushed for the role, even after winning an Oscar for The Accused. Screenwriter Ted Talley had pictured her from the beginning. He said she had the right kind of intelligence. When she finally got the part, she made it her own. Hopkins didn't just play Hannibal Lecter. He designed him. He based Lecter's voice on HAL 9000 from 2001, a space odyssey, calm, robotic, and eerie. He imagined Lecter moving like a shark, quiet, focused, deadly. He borrowed the cold stare from his own drama teacher, a man who could dismantle a student with just a look. Hopkins trained himself to not blink on camera. It made people uncomfortable. And that was the point. He also pulled from odd sources for the voice. He said Lecter's speech patterns had a bit of Truman Capote, and even Katharine Hepburn. The result was chilling. He turned every line into something unsettling. Every sentence sounded like a trap. Then, no one expected a horror film to drop on Valentine's Day. But on February 14, 1991, that's exactly what happened. Orion Pictures made a bold move by releasing The Silence of the Lambs, a film filled with cannibalism, murder, and psychological terror, right in the middle of a holiday known for roses and romance. At the time, February was where studios dumped movies they had no faith in. Audiences didn't typically rush to cinemas during the cold months, especially not for horror. But this wasn't a typical movie, and Orion wasn't playing it safe. That weekend, the gamble paid off. The film pulled in $13.8 million from just under 1,500 theaters. It shot straight to #1 at the box office. Even more shocking, this wasn't a fluke. Horror movies almost never succeed on romantic holidays. But The Silence of the Lambs grabbed people who wanted something different. That opening weekend was only 10.5% of what it would go on to earn in the U.S., a clear sign that word of mouth was strong and the movie had serious staying power. And it just kept going. The film had a modest budget of around $19 to $20 million, but it ended up grossing $275.7 million worldwide. In Hollywood terms, this film had legs, and strong ones. Its domestic earnings alone were $130.7 million, and international numbers reached $142 million. The domestic total made up 47.9% of the global take. But here's what really turned heads. The movie had a legs multiplier of 9.5. That means it earned nearly 10 times its opening weekend. That kind of multiplier is almost unheard of, especially for horror. Instead of fading after a few weeks, it ran for an average of 15.5 weeks in theaters. At its peak, it played in 1,642 cinemas. This kind of long run is usually reserved for Disney films or summer blockbusters, not R-rated thrillers with disturbing subject matter. But The Silence of the Lambs wasn't like anything else. Then came the awards. The film didn't just earn money, it earned respect. At the Oscars, it made history. It won all 5 of the major categories: Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actor, Best Actress, and Best Adapted Screenplay. Only 2 other movies had done that before. It Happened One Night in 1934, and One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest in 1975. It had been over 15 years since a film had swept the Big Five. and no horror movie had ever won Best Picture. The Silence of the Lambs broke that wall down. Even more impressive, Anthony Hopkins won Best Actor for only 16 minutes of screen time. That's one of the shortest performances ever to take the Oscar. But those 16 minutes were unforgettable. The film also swept awards from critics' circles across New York, Los Angeles, and the National Board of Review. It wasn't just a hit, it was a moment. The impact didn't stop with awards. It became a cultural earthquake. For 5 weeks straight, it stayed at the top of the U.S. box office. It sparked conversations in universities, film schools, and talk shows. People debated its themes: violence, gender, power, and its characters became household names. Lecturers wrote papers on it. Comedians spoofed it. From The Simpsons to South Park, even shows like Phineas and Ferb couldn't resist referencing it. The movie had redefined what horror could be. It wasn't just about scares. It was about story, acting, and atmosphere. Years later, films like Get Out would benefit from the path Silence carved. Before 1991, horror wasn't considered award-worthy. After this, everything changed. The deleted monologue from The Silence of the Lambs was nearly 2 minutes long, and what Anthony Hopkins did in that take left the crew speechless. He started with his back to the camera, completely still. Then, slowly, he turned around, a full pirouette until his face filled the screen. He was crying. The tears weren't fake. They were flowing as he spoke with calm intensity. And the lines? Brutal, deep, raw. Not a single cut in the shot. Hopkins stayed in full emotional control while delivering some of the most complex psychological insight ever written for the character of Hannibal Lecter. Critics who saw it later said that scene alone could have won him another Oscar. It wasn't just scary, it was human. This version of Lecter didn't just analyze other killers. He understood pain, his own pain. Hopkins wasn't playing a monster anymore. He was playing a man who had been broken, rebuilt, and twisted into something terrifying. And the performance was so emotionally deep that it risked making the audience feel for Lecter. That's why it was cut. But the words still echo. One line in particular made the entire crew pause. "Billy wasn't born a killer, Clarice." "Oh no, he was made one." That changes everything. In the film we know Lecter is cold, calculating, and distant. But in this deleted scene, he's on the verge of breaking. He keeps talking, his voice trembling, almost as if he's not just talking about Buffalo Bill anymore. His houses will be very small with tiny windows, no flowers, no pets, no toys, no sun. That level of detail, it's personal. It's too specific, as if he's describing his own past. Then he says, Billy wants to be reborn, not changed, not cured, reborn. And suddenly, it clicks. This isn't just a profile. It's a confession hiding in plain sight. Jonathan Demme, the director, knew what he had. When Hopkins finished, Demme reportedly shouted, "Cut and print it! That was super duper 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 good!" Everyone on set knew they had witnessed something historic. But later, in the editing room, Demme made a choice, a hard one. He cut it. He believed the scene made Lecter too sympathetic, too complex. It risked tipping the story's balance, so he let it go. Not because it was weak, but because it was too strong. And that wasn't the only disturbing thing we never fully understood. The original script paired that deleted monologue with unsettling cinematography. Hopkins began the scene in shadows. Slowly, the camera crept in as his face was revealed, tear-streaked, bathed in soft, golden light. It was a visual transformation that mirrored his emotional one. The lighting, the movement, the focus. every frame crafted to pull the viewer in closer, until Lecter was no longer a villain behind glass, but a damaged soul speaking through it. That psychological layering didn't end there. Hidden in the dialogue was a darker truth. Film psychologists noticed that Lecter's descriptions of Billy's childhood sounded eerily autobiographical. The drawings, the lack of light, the absence of joy. As he talked, his emotional state unraveled, and it became clear he wasn't just diagnosing someone else. He was revealing his own trauma. The real horror wasn't Buffalo Bill. It was the possibility that Lecter was Buffalo Bill in another timeline, that he'd seen the same darkness and walked through it alone. While this scene was lost in the final cut, the film still delivered unforgettable horror. One of its most infamous moments was Buffalo Bill's lotion scene. He kept Catherine Martin in a pit, refusing to call her by name. Just it. The walls were scratched. Nails were broken. You could feel the past victims. And when Catherine refused to follow orders, he punished her with a blast from the hose. Cold water. No mercy. One moment he was soft-spoken. The next, he snapped. This scene made even First Lady Barbara Bush storm out of a screening, horrified. And the worst part? All of it was a build-up to his goal, turning human skin into a suit. But this wasn't just a movie about killers. It was about victims, too. Especially Clarice Starling. Her past, hidden under years of silence, came out during a chilling exchange with Lecter. She told him about the lambs, how she heard them scream during slaughter on her uncle's ranch. She tried to save one, carried it for miles, but she failed. And that guilt followed her into adulthood. The crying lambs became a metaphor. Clarice joined the FBI, not just to serve justice, but to stop the screaming, to save one more innocent life. When Lecter uncovered this truth, he didn't mock her. He saw her, understood her. And that's what made their dynamic so disturbing. He was the only one who truly got her. And still, he was a monster. Nothing proved that more than the escape. Inside his Memphis holding cell, Lecter waited. Still, calm, deadly. He had hidden a pin to pick his cuffs. When the guards entered, he was polite, thanked them. Then, like a switch flipped, he struck. One guard was beaten so badly his face became unrecognizable. The other? Disemboweled. His body turned into a grotesque piece of theater. Lecter strung him up like a twisted angel, arms out, lit from above. Then he wore the other guard's face, literally, peeled it off, and used it as a disguise to escape. One detail often missed, he placed the victim's eyeball over his own, so no one looked too closely. They saw blood, they saw wounds, but they didn't see him. And then came the ending. Clarice got her badge. She solved the case, saved Catherine. But it wasn't over. The phone rang. It was Lecter. His voice calm as ever. He congratulated her, then asked for a favor. Don't come after him. She refused, and he smiled. I'm having an old friend for dinner. That wasn't just a joke. It was a promise. The final shot showed him stalking Dr. Chilton in a sunny airport, ready to feed again. It was subtle, polite, horrifying. But the scariest parts of Lecter's evil weren't always physical. His conversations with Clarice were slow poison. He dissected her childhood, mocked her insecurities, mimicked her voice. He made her doubt herself, then pulled her back in. Every question was a trap, every compliment a hook. He used language like a scalpel, cutting, slicing, exposing. He diagnosed her trauma, not to help, but to control. Even after he was gone, his words stayed with her. That was the real damage. In 1991, The Silence of the Lambs became a massive success. It made over $272 million worldwide and won 5 Academy Awards, including Best Picture. But behind the praise, there was a much darker story playing out, one that didn't get a spotlight on the red carpet. At the center of it was a character named James Gumb, better known as Buffalo Bill. He was a brutal killer who skinned his victims and dreamed of becoming a woman. But instead of simply showing a disturbed man, the film took it a step further. It linked gender nonconformity directly to violence, madness, and predatory behavior. In one infamous scene, Gumb dances in front of a mirror, wearing makeup, a woman's robe, and tucking his genitals, all while the haunting song, "Goodbye Horses," plays. That moment, burned into pop culture, became a dangerous symbol, one that made many viewers associate trans identity with horror. Filmmakers tried to soften the blow. Hannibal Lecter even says in the movie, "He's not a real transsexual." But that line didn't help. The visual damage was done. It echoed the same idea seen in Psycho with Norman Bates, and in real-life stories of serial killer Ed Gein, who also inspired Buffalo Bill. Again and again, cinema pushed the idea of cross-dressing killer as if it were a common horror trope. Transgender people didn't have many characters to look up to in movies. And when the few representations that did exist painted them as dangerous, it created real harm. Trans writer Eleanor Jean later admitted that as a child in Texas, she believed being trans meant she would either end up a sex worker, a drug addict, or insane. She believed she had to hide who she was. That fear didn't come from real-life examples. It came from Hollywood. The anger hit a boiling point in 1992. On March 30th, at the Academy Awards in Los Angeles, the protest began. Hundreds of activists from groups like Queer Nation and ACTUP gathered outside the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion. They weren't just shouting, they were prepared. ACT UP had raised bail money ahead of time, even though their bank account only had $25. Organizers knew arrests were likely. Protesters held signs that read, "Worst Picture, Silence of the Lambs," and "Hollywood Stop Censoring Our True Queer Lives." As limousines pulled up, activists sat down in the streets, blocking the red carpet. Chants like, "Hey, hey, ho, ho, homophobia has got to go," rang out. Celebrities were forced to walk past them. Police on horseback charged into the crowd. At least 10 people were arrested. One of them, Annette Godino, was hit with a billy club and dragged into a van. She spent the night in a holding cell, sharing space with sex workers and eating bologna sandwiches. For many watching at home, the protest barely made it to TV. Microphones were adjusted to block the sound. But amateur video captured the truth. Crowds yelling, "Burn, Hollywood, burn!" Rob Roberts, a member of Queer Nation, summed up the message. "We're not slashers. We're not child molesters. We don't skin women." Meanwhile, Ted Levine, the actor who played Buffalo Bill, was being praised for his terrifying performance. Critics called it brilliant. But years later, the weight of the role haunted him. Levine didn't publicly speak often about it, but others did. Trans filmmaker Lily Wachowski later said that Buffalo Bill had become political ammunition. Anti-trans campaigns used his image to claim that trans people were a danger in women's bathrooms. "We are not predators," she said. "We are prey." Even when new projects tried to fix the damage, the shadow of Buffalo Bill loomed. In 2021, CBS released a follow-up series called Clarice. It included a trans character who called out the original film directly. She explained how the media storm around Buffalo Bill made it feel like transsexuals were monsters. The show's producers admitted the harm. Elizabeth Claviter, an executive producer, said openly that the Hannibal Lecter franchise had done a great deal of harm. What makes the film's legacy so painful is how subtle and powerful it was. It didn't yell its message. It slipped it in quietly, through eerie music, dim lighting, and disturbing transformation scenes. But the impact was loud. Scholars now point to the killer in a dress trope as one of the most damaging patterns in Hollywood history. It wasn't just in Silence of the Lambs. It had roots all the way back to Alfred Hitchcock's work, and it kept growing from there. Anthony Hopkins didn't need much time to make history. He was on screen for only 24 minutes and 52 seconds in The Silence of the Lambs. But that was enough. In 2003, the American Film Institute named his Hannibal Lecter the greatest movie villain of all time. He ranked higher than Norman Bates and even Darth Vader. The secret to his chilling performance? Hopkins never blinked. He said he based the character's cold stare on HAL, the computer from 2001, A Space Odyssey. His voice? A strange blend of Truman Capote and Katharine Hepburn. It worked. Viewers felt their skin crawl. He won the Oscar for Best Actor, and the film did something almost no movie ever has. It won the Big Five: Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actor, Best Actress, and Best Adapted Screenplay. But lightning didn't strike twice. Even though Hannibal made more money than The Silence of the Lambs, earning $165 million in the US, compared to the original's $130 million, critics hated it. Its Rotten Tomatoes score dropped from 95% to just 39%. Part of the problem was that Jodie Foster didn't return. She chose another project called Flora Plum. Julianne Moore took her place, but the magic between Hopkins and Foster was gone. Red Dragon came next and made $93 million. Then Hannibal Rising bombed, earning only $27 million. Even Manhunter, the 1986 film with Brian Cox as Lecter, had only made $8.6 million. The numbers proved what fans already knew. Without Hopkins in that exact role, the formula didn't work. No budget or star power could recreate what made the original so unforgettable. Still, the impact of The Silence of the Lambs went far beyond box office numbers. The film became part of everyday culture. According to IMDb, it's been referenced or parodied over 500 times. Everyone knows the line, "I ate his liver with some fava beans and a nice Chianti." People even started making recipes to match it. The disturbing dance scene from Buffalo Bill became its own pop culture phenomenon. TV shows like Family Guy, The Simpsons, and The Office jumped on the bandwagon. Billy Crystal hosted the Oscars dressed as Hannibal Lecter. Whole movies like The Silence of the Lambs and even musicals were created just to spoof it. And when Halloween rolled around, Lecter's face mask became one of the most popular costume pieces in the world. Decades later, people still quote it, still laugh at the parodies, still shiver at the original. At the same time, academics started looking at the film through a more serious lens. One university thesis from Spain explored how the story tackled childhood trauma and gender identity using Freudian theory. Scholars picked apart Clarice Starling's role in a male-dominated workplace. They noted how she was constantly underestimated, forced to prove herself over and over. Analysts also praised the film's structure. Clarice was seen as a character who never changed her core beliefs. Even when surrounded by danger, she held steady. Others focused on Buffalo Bill and how the character was used to explore identity and how society misunderstands it. In 2025, the London Soundtrack Festival even hosted a live performance of the film's score, with composer Howard Shore in attendance. This wasn't just a horror movie anymore. It was a work of art, and it's not going away. The streaming era gave The Silence of the Lambs a second life. As of May 2025, it's available on platforms like Max, AMC+, Philo, and DirecTV. Peacock added it in November 2024, just in time for Halloween. New fans are discovering it. Old fans are revisiting it. Some are watching it just to study the symbolism behind the lambs. Clarice, haunted by memories of lambs being slaughtered when she was young, tries to save the lambs in every case she takes. It's more than just crime solving. It's her personal way of healing. Some film schools now teach entire courses around the movie. Others bring it up as the only pure horror film ever to win Best Picture at the Oscars, a title no other horror movie has been able to match.